In this section, we're going to study the spinal cord. The spinal cord is composed of the same nerve tissue we had back in the brain. It is going to relay and process information, but it's just not as complex as the brain. Why is it still important? Well, it's your relay station. It is how your body communicates to your brain. Without the spinal cord, there is no communication. It also can do some level of processing, not the complex thinking and memory that the brain does, but it does do processing of things like your reflexes. When you lay your hand on a hot stove, you don't have to stop and process that. Stove, hot, causing damage, let's pull our hand off. No, we don't have to have that delay. We don't have to have that higher level processing. The spinal cord, hot stove, off your hand before you even realize it's hot. The meninges that were protecting the brain are going to pass right through the foramen magnum, that big hole in the occipital bone, and continue to protect the spinal cord. You're going to see the exact same terminology, epidural space, dura mater, and so on. But there are going to be variations in the meninges because we have different size and space issues. The brain really fills up most of the cranial cavity. Size-wise, it doesn't leave a lot of extra room. But your spinal cord is smaller compared to this big giant hole we're sitting in. Spinal cord, big hole of the bone. We're going to see more space in here, so we're going to need to fill up or occupy that space. Therefore, we have in the spinal cord an actual epidural space where we didn't have one in the brain. It was only potential. This epidural space here is filled up with adipose tissue, a lot of adipose tissue. It's going to help cushion the spinal cord, fill up some of that extra space inside that vertebral foramen. There's also some blood supply in here. It makes it a really good place to put medications. If you have an epidural, you're having medication put into your epidural space. Sitting up under the epidural space is the dura mater. Now, in the brain, the dura mater was two-layered. One layer hugged the bone, periosteal, and one layer folded and came down with the meninges, the meningeal layer. But in the spinal cord, there is no periosteal layer. It's only one layer. You can see this one thick, tough dura mater layer. And notice it not only protects the spinal cord, but it does extend out distally and protect the nerve. So here's our nerve once we get outside the bone. Underneath the dura mater is a subdural space. Now in the brain, that was more of a space where we had some drainage. But in the spinal cord, it's only potential space. Normally in the spinal cord, your dura mater and your arachnoid mater are stuck or adhered together. So we don't see any subdural space. I'm just going to kind of do this because it's potential. We don't really see it much in the spinal cord. Working from bone in, all right, so here's bone. We start out with an epidural space, then we have a dura mater, we have a potential subdural space, but it's really not notable because the arachnoid mater is going to stick right to it, and that's going to be our next layer. The arachnoid mater is just like it is in the brain. Very thin, very web-like membrane, gives off this area below it, which is really important. The area below it is the subarachnoid space. You can see some of that spider webby look. The subarachnoid space, just like in the brain, is where our cerebral spinal fluid is. That is where our shower water is. It not only rinses the brain, but it can help rinse the spinal cord. Because of its cleaning capability, it can contain bacteria and viruses and things. That is where we're going to go if we withdraw a sample of spinal fluid. When you hear someone having a spinal tap or spinal fluid withdrawn, they're withdrawing it from the subdural space, and it's useful to tell you what bacteria or virus is potentially attacking your spinal cord. Underneath that is the very thin and delicate pia mater, and like the brain, it hugs all the curves and the contours of the spinal cord. But here is one of the variations. The spinal cord, because of its size, would have a lot of wiggle. Even though we have filled it up with this epidural fat in here, and we do have all this cerebral spinal fluid, there's still a lot of wiggle. Well, you don't want wiggle in the spinal cord because it's nerve tissue, and the more it moves, the more it could be stimulated. So here is one of the differences we see in the meninges around the brain and the meninges around the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, the pia mater has an extra function. It not only protects the spinal cord, but it helps to anchor the spinal cord. The anchors are these structures called denticulate ligaments. And it's where the pia mater extends out right and left and anchors the spinal cord to the layers around it. It's going to help stop some of the side-to-side wiggle the spinal cord would have otherwise, because it is a very small structure inside of a very large space. We'll move out then and look at the external anatomy of the spinal cord, because it does extend from the brainstem. So the brainstem just keeps extending down, and it does pass all the way down to your second lumbar vertebrae. If you'll think about your rib cage, I'll kind of draw us some ribs in here. So our 12th rib will stop about here, and then that is where our spinal cord stops as well. Your spinal cord does not extend all the way down. It only extends to this point called the conus medullaris, or the medullary cone, if you want the English version. The spinal cord extends from your brainstem through your first lumbar vertebrae to the conus medullaris. If I look at it, I can see that there are some front and back landmarks. The back has a sulcus. If I draw it, it's a little bit easier to see. If this is your spinal cord, the front has a really notable crack where the back just has this fold. This is the posterior median sulcus, whereas in the front we have more of a crack, which is called a fissure. It's another way to detect the front from the back of the spinal cord. Beginning at my brainstem and going all the way down the conus medullaris, which is somewhere around where your L1 and L2 vertebrae meet. Remember that anchor we did earlier where we took the pia mater and we anchored it out right and left so there wouldn't be any side-to-side wiggle? Well, it's already anchored at the top with the brain, but I have to consider, what about the bottom? Because you don't want your spinal cord swaying like a horse's tail would sway. So we're going to also anchor the spinal cord down at the bottom. The pia mater is going to go out right and left as denticulate ligaments. Now these are nerves, but there would be denticulate ligaments in here. And when I get to the bottom here, I'm going to get an extension of the pia mater. See, here's the pia mater. It's going to come all the way down, and it's going to literally anchor the spinal cord down with this filium terminale, or this terminal filium. It just means a filament at the end that's going to anchor it to your coccygeal vertebrae. If I look at a side view of your sacrum, your coccyx curves around like this. So the filium terminal is going to attach to here. That way we have the spinal cord anchored at all ends. The spinal cord is anchored at the top, the spinal cord is anchored down here at the bottom, and it's anchored out right and left, therefore stopping the sway or the wiggle that the spinal cord might otherwise have. All of that sway and wiggle would equate to stimulation. All right, one of the last things we'll look at here with the external anatomy is that we do have different enlargements, meaning the spinal cord's thicker in some places than the other. Here in the cervical region, it is thicker. Then it narrows as you come through the thoracic region, and then it swells out again when you get to the lumbar region before it comes to that conus medullaris, or that medullary cone, that point. The question is, why? Why would the spinal cord be thicker here and then again thicker down here? Well, think about what the spinal cord is doing. It is feeding information from your body into your brain. Well, coming from the arms and the shoulders and the neck, you're going to have more nerves than you do coming from just your rib cage and your chest and back. So when you have all these nerves coming in from the arms, you're going to have a little bit wider. When you only have a few nerves coming in from your back and your chest, it can be more narrow. So why does it widen again here at the lumbar? Because you're getting all the nerves coming from your lower legs, not to mention your back and around your abdomen. So we put all of this together and kind of think clinically just a minute. We think about having an epidural. or having a spinal tap. Think about where all of those things happen. All of those things happen down here. So I want you to stop and ask yourself, why down there? Why not withdraw it from anywhere up here? So look at one more slide and then we're going to answer that. When you look at it in overall view, you will see coming off the spinal cord, we're going to have these spinal nerves, and they have an entire chapter, so we'll revisit those. But you'll also see that coming off of it are these roots. The spinal cord itself, with its fold on one side and its crack on the other, has a posterior and an anterior nerve root, and those roots will eventually merge together and make a nerve. And again, this is an entirely separate chapter, so we'll come back to these nerves, but you do need to know that there are roots coming off the spinal cord. So this is the posterior root because there is the fold. This is the anterior root because there is the big crack. Those roots are going to bundle up again in another place. That's why we're even mentioning them now. So we have a cervical enlargement to the spinal cord. It narrows in the thoracic region because I'm only feeding the chest area. It widens back out in the lumbar region because of all the nerves in the lower leg, and it comes to that point, the medullary cone. Well, from this point down, which by the way, we're only at L1, so remember we still have L2, 3, 4, 5, the sacral bones, the sacrum, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 4 coccygeal bones. There's still a lot of bones left. From here down, it's not a bundle as in the spinal cord, but instead it's these nerve roots again, making what appears to be a horse's tail. Cauda means tail, equine means horse. Once you get past the conus medullaris, the rest of the vertebral cavity is a bundle of nerves that are just like a horse's tail instead of being one solid spinal cord. So why do we withdraw fluid and do epidurals from here down? We run less risk of hitting the cord itself. If you pass a needle into here, you're going to hit tough tissue. But if you pass a needle into here, what are these nerve roots going to do? They're going to almost move out of your way, and you will be able to access the fluid beneath it. Because if you'll notice, the pia mater, let me come out and draw the spinal cord. All right, cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and the cone. The pia mater that is coming down with it, the pia mater is coming down with it, denticulate ligaments coming off. Here, we have this little bitty section like this, so you're going to have a nice little pool of cerebral spinal fluid here. Well, we don't worry about the nerves because they're like a horse's tail. And if I pass a needle in here, well, it'll just basically let them scooch over or move, and you can withdraw your fluid to test and see maybe what bacteria or virus or what the issue is. That'll wrap up our external anatomy, so then we can move and look at the internal. If I look at the inside of the spinal cord, it has this very notable butterfly-shaped gray matter, that unmyelinated neurons and cell bodies. Then it is surrounded by the myelinated white matter, and we call these the tracts. We can see two other features other than the horns and the tracts. We can see that there is a central canal right here in the middle. That is continuous up from the brain where we had the lateral ventricles, the interventricular foramen, the third ventricles, the cerebral aqueduct, the fourth ventricle, continues as the central canal. It's what connects each butterfly wing. You can tell the difference in the front and the back of the spinal cord by using a couple of landmarks. One, we can look at the wings of the butterfly, the gray matter. The posterior wing is more pointy. The anterior wing is broader or wider. And then only in the thoracic region will we have this little side bumps of the lateral horn. So anterior wings are wide, broad. The posterior wings are thinner. And notice the posterior wings seem to reach almost to the edge. So that's one landmark. I can also use the difference in this sulcus, which is a fold, and this fissure, which is a crack. The crack is in the front and the fold is in the back. The three distinct regions of the gray matter are the anterior horn. Now the anterior horn, that wide, broad horn, is the region for motor nerve roots. That is where we're going to send messages out to the motor cells that say, hey, skeletal muscle, this is what I need you to do. This is the out message, or the motor. The wide, broad anterior horn. The more pointy posterior horn is the sensory. In other words, this is the input route, where we receive sensory information from both the somatic, the general body, and the viscera, from our skin and our skeletal muscles and our blood vessels and organs. Now, as I said, in the thoracic region only, right up to the very first lumbar, we have lateral horns, not seen in all of the spinal cord, just in those regions. The lateral horns are involved in controlling your viscera through your autonomic nervous system. You know, that one that the hypothalamus is controlling. The ones we don't think about are controlled by that lateral horn. Now remind yourself, what makes this gray matter, or what makes these butterflies, is the fact that all of the neurons or the nerve cells here in this area are unmyelinated neurons. We do also have white matter, myelinated axons that are going to travel very fast, saltatory conduction. These axons are going to serve as our relay station for the spinal cord. Now, we don't organize them in this nice, neat, I can easy see it like we do the gray matter. So let me come back. I have a fold in the back. Let's see if I can make it a fold. We have a fold in the back. We have a crack in the front. We have a pointy back horn. We have these broad, wide front horns. And I should make it a little better shaped there. There we go. Then I have all of these sections surrounding it. These sections surrounding the gray matter is your white matter. But now notice it's not in a distinctive shape. This is obviously shaped like a butterfly. The white matter out here is not in distinctive shapes, but I do have distinctive regions or groups. We have these little bundles in here called funiculi. Funiculi are your bundles of myelinated axons that have organized themselves into tracks or columns. And then we name them using the same kind of terminology. So I have a fold on one side, I have a crack on the other side. So this would be my posterior column of white matter. This is also a posterior column of white matter. This would be the anterior column. I'm telling that because this is the sulcus or the fold. That is the fissure or the crack. So that makes this the lateral column of white matter and the lateral column of white matter. Now within those columns would be little bundles or tracks sending messages up into the brain and back down from the brain, ascending and descending. Your sensory travels in the back and your motor travels in the front, just like we saw in the spinal cord. So these regions back here are all sensory, and the regions up here in the front are all motor. Messages come in the back of the spinal cord and go out the front. Our ascending tracts are carrying information in. An ascending track in the back is carrying information in. A descending track is going to be carrying motor information back out. Ascending information in. Motor is a descending carrying information back out.